Hi, I'm Frank, well you know me. Here we have Lynn Myron Wiles, my mom's first cousin. Actually, we're here to test that. I brought a DNA test. He just spit in a cup. I'm going to send it on. Basically, Myron, as he's known, correct?
Correct.
Is the grandson of Alfonso Newberry.
That's correct.
Alfonso Gordon Newberry, who had a dalliance, as we know, in 1902 Kansas City with Polly Ann Bryant. The result of that dalliance was my grandfather, Alfonso J. Newberry. I've asked Myron if he could tell a little bit about his family for us today, and I'd like to turn over the show to Myron.
Thank you. I was born in 1928 to my father and mother, which was also Lynn Leroy Wiles and my mother Mary Louise. We lived in Parsons, Kansas. I never was able to meet my grandfather because he died before I was born, of course. But we lived in Kansas for a number of years until we moved to California. As I started my junior year there, went to high school, then I went to work, and I worked for the phone company, and I stayed with the phone company and retired. And now I'm completely retired and do as little as I can get away with.
Excellent.
Any questions?
Tell me a little bit about your mother.
My mother lived out on the farm, and that was near the railroad there. They had a watering thing for the train to stop at, and that's Alfonso maintained that pump there at the for the trains when they needed water. And he maintained that equipment and everything. They had a little farm, but then when he passed away, why, my grandmother,
Tiny Grandma?
yeah, I called her Tiny Grandma. I forget what her real name was. You remember?
Sattler was her maiden name.
Yeah.
Louise?
No, it wasn't Louise. I don't believe. But anyway, she decided that she had better move to town, so they bought them. The exchange is what they did. There was a cousin of some sort that wanted to be on the farm, and it was 10 acres. And they exchanged their house to the house in the city. And so it made it very nice for my grandmother. And then when my mother got married to my father, my grandmother says, you stay at the house and keep the house, because she worked for the state hospital there and could get a room there. So it made it very nice for her, and of course it made it nice for my parents. And we lived there in that little home probably for about 4 to 5 years. And then we moved to a little closer to town at that time, because that was just it was just in the city limits of Parsons. Next question.
That was Liberty. Was that the township that was called where they had the farm? His vegetable farm?
No, I don't think so. I think it was still considered as Parsons. It was only a few miles from Parsons. Mm-hmm. It might have been associated with one of the other small
You told
towns.
me a neat story about how the train would stop there for your grandmother.
Yes.
Tell me that one.
Well, he wouldn't stop for my grandmother. He would stop for my mother and pick her up and take her into town. And then if she could, she'd get a ride back if possible. And they'd stop and pick her up. And I know it cost money for an engine to stop and start again. But she did have that quite a few, and it was very good, and it really helped them, you know. So, another question.
Any stories that were passed on to you about Alfonso and his strongman career?
His, not really a great deal. I just knew that he was supposed to be the strongest man in the world. I imagine there was maybe a lot of people that were strong, but he was that. And I understand that he also worked as a doctor under some kind of addition. I don't know for sure, but I know we had some of the tools that he used as a doctor, so I I kind of figured he must have been something associated with the doctoring.
He was pretty much a jack of all trades.
Yes, that's what I'm understanding more and more from you.
From 1897 to 1903, he ran a restaurant in Kansas City.
Mm-hmm.
He started as a bouncer, then became a cook, then he became partners with a man by the last name of Williamson. So the name of the restaurant was Newberry and Williamson. That was in 1899. In 1901, he got his own restaurant that was called Alfonso Newberry.
Newberry, yes. See, I didn't know that about that. You have informed me on that. So.
Well, thank heavens for the Kansas directories from back then, because it pretty much spells it out.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's very interesting.
And now the weird part. We know him as Alfonso Gordon Newberry. He was the son of, let me see if I've got Simeon, or he was supposed to be the son of Simeon Newberry and Mary Elizabeth Deweese. But when I got the pension files for Simeon Newberry, who fought in the Civil War, it turns out that Mary Elizabeth Deweese, now Mary Elizabeth Newberry, divorced Simeon in 1871 because he had gotten married to some other woman at the same time. He would later do time for bigamy in the prison. And he would actually, in his lifetime, do 2 terms for bigamy. It seemed to be a habit with Simeon Newberry. So Alfonso Gordon Newberry was born in 1873, 2 years after the divorce. At this time, Mary Elizabeth Deweese Newberry had moved to Parsons, Kansas. There in 1873, at the time that she had the baby, this baby, there was a man living with him by the name of Gallatin Monroe Nolan, and that's spelled N-O-W-L-I-N. Gallatin was known as Old Man Nolan to all the Newberries. They knew about this guy, but what they didn't know, and that has now been proven through DNA connections, is that Gallatin Monroe Nolan had impregnated Mary Elizabeth Deweese Newberry. She named Alfonso Gordon Newberry because of the problems with having a child out of wedlock. And what's interesting is that Gallatin Monroe Nolan married her 2 months after Alfonso's birth. They would never divorce, though Mary Elizabeth would run away with this guy by the name of Hackett. We don't know his first name. We know that he had this counterfeit scheme where he would send in $1 to New York, and they would send him back $10 in counterfeit money. So he got all the people. There was Samuel Newberry, who was brother to Alfonso, and also Ernest Newberry. Yes, for there were actually 3 children to Mary Elizabeth Deweese Newberry. Simeon being the father of Samuel Newberry and Ernest Newberry, who was my grandfather's foster father. And then, of course, Mary Elizabeth leaves after divorcing him, moves to Parsons, and has Alfonso, whose true father was Gallatin Monroe Nolan. I have been attempting to get the descendants of Gallatin Monroe Nolan's second family to, well, answer the phone, if you will, but they're not too keen on connecting with me just yet, but you wait. So there's the story of Alfonso Newberry's true father. So he's actually a Nolan, which means that you are Irish.
I didn't know
The
that.
Nolan name is a very famous Irish name. I believe it's Cook County they come from. I have a little bit more research to do on it. There's a wonderful thing called the Nolan Stone Genealogies. It's a great book that outlines the whole path of the family. Specifically, Brian Ward Nolan, who was a famous Revolutionary War soldier. It is through Brian Ward Nolan that I have had numerous DNA connections with shared ancestors. And that's the true story of Alfonso Gordon Newberry's father. So, though his name was Newberry, he was actually a Nolan.
Nolan.
N-O-W-L-I-N. Did you know you're Irish?
I didn't know that.
Well, you know it now.
Yeah, yes.
So right now, we are in Springfield, Missouri. I drove down to see Myron and have him take our DNA test. He's spit in a cup. And
Sure did.
we're gonna prove this finally and once and for all. Now to give a little bit of backstory on Polly Ann Bryant. After she had my grandfather, J. Newberry, I know that she kept possession of him for a couple of years till he was finally adopted by Alfonso's brother Ernest. And that was my grandfather's foster father. His foster mother was Lula Williams, who then became Lula Newberry. We know quite a bit about her. So that's the story of Alfonso, Myron, and Frank. Have a good day. The magical history tour continues.
Yeah.